Good morning, everyone. We will start in just 1 minute. Looks like people are still joining the call. It's morning time, maybe it's coffee time, and we'll get started in just a couple of seconds. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Orit Kalman. I'm a facilitator with Sac State Consensus and Collaboration Program, supporting this workshop that is provided in collaboration with the board, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and DWR. The focus of the workshop today is the 180-day technical and regulatory assistance program for recharge projects using high flows. As we get started, just to let you know about remote participation today, we are going to hear some presentations, but then we're really looking forward to engage you in conversation. And so please feel free when if you have questions to pose them in the chat panel. You can also ask questions and provide comments in person and just use the hand raise to do that. Really want to encourage you when we're in discussion, we're in conversation, to turn your video on and unmute to ask your questions and share your thoughts throughout this workshop. We hope to both provide presentations, but as we get into the Q&A, really want to hear about your experiences and your perspectives here. So the purpose of the workshop is to really support local agencies in efforts to expedite recharge projects, given all the planning and coordination efforts that needs to go into obtaining the temporary permit for recharge. We really want to support those who are actively working on this to recharge in the next winter season. And so today we're going to share information about the 180-day temporary water rights permit application process, highlight technical and regulatory assistance available from state agency. We really want to make sure that those who are working on this are ready for potentially high flows in December 23 through May 24 and in the next winter season. And in registration, we heard from those who are joining today. We heard from 16 participants who are planning to submit 180-day temporary permit for recharge project this year. And those who responded stated that they need assistance with their water availability analysis, downstream impact analysis, project scoping, biological assessment, lake and stream bed alternation program. So we're hoping to cover some of these topics today. We also heard from some of you that even though you're not actively working on it, you are in initial planning efforts. And so hopefully hearing both from agencies, but also from other participants about the work that is ongoing will be helpful. We also got a list of questions from you, and so we share those with the presenters, and hopefully you will hear responses to your questions, and then we can provide time for you to continue and expand on those questions and ask more detailed questions. So to that effect, we're going to have 3 presentations. First, we'll hear from the State Water Resource Control Board about the water rights, providing an overview and where the 180-day temporary permit fits in and what that looks like. We'll also hear from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, their role in consulting and supporting the permitting process. And then we'll hear from the California Department of Water Resources on available technical and regulatory assistance to support this. So we'll get those presentations. Between presentations, we'll have some time for you to ask clarifying questions about the presentations to the extent time allow. And then we'll close at 11, and then we have time set up specifically at the last hour to have a more informal conversations with those who have more specific questions about the work that you're doing in your areas. So that will be the plan for today. I will take a couple of quick short breaks. It's really hard to stay on Zoom for 3 hours. So we hope that you stay with us and engage with the presenters and with each other really in conversation today. The intent really today is to really strengthen the coordination between local agencies who do the work, describe the project. As primary agency, they provide local coordination. And then as you work with different state agencies for technical support, for consultation, to review applications and so forth, we want to make sure that we tighten those connections, and that's really the purpose today. And to start the workshop, I'd like to first invite Amanda Montgomery with the State Water Resource Control Board, Division of Water Rights, and then Paul Goslin with the California Department of Water Resources, Sustainable Groundwater Management, to just set the stage for our workshop today.
Great, thank you so much. As mentioned, I'm Amanda Montgomery, and I am the permitting manager here in the State Water Board, Division of Water Rights. I am so excited for today's workshop. I've been involved in groundwater recharge permitting for about 10 years now, since SGMA came online. And today is the first time that we're really having a focused workshop with prospective applicants. It's so exciting to see the energy with our fellow agencies, State Board, Department of Water Resources, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife together for you today, and then to be able to talk with applicants about their projects and get them ready for next winter. So the board gets asked frequently about what we can do to help facilitate groundwater recharge projects. And the purpose of today's workshop is to highlight one of the ways we're trying to help, is to be out there to talk with you, prospective applicants, to hear about your projects and to answer your questions. Here in California, we all recognize California's weather whiplash. We have this droughts to extreme flood. I mean, we all wish for a normal year and it never seems to happen. One thing, I've made it through 2 droughts in the last 10 years that I've been working on these recharge projects. And each time we have a drought, we think, oh, there's not going to be enough water for a project. So, we start to hear from parties, oh, we're not going to come in. We're not going to seek a temporary permit. And then lo and behold, we have a really wet water year following it up. So, and then the opposite happens. We have these really wet years and they think, oh, it's not going to turn dry again. So I think my best advice is just plan for every year to be a year for a temporary permit, or eventually moving into standard permitting when you're ready, because you just don't know. And we just need to grab the water when it's there. So one thing, the board has really focused on in the last 10 years is focusing on drought resiliency, and then continued planning for high precipitation events, like I was mentioning. The governor's water supply strategy, released in August 2022, recognizes this need for our state agencies to work together to significantly expand the state's ability to capture water from winter storms and to adapt to more extreme weather patterns. So in response to that, over the last 10 years, we've had a number of efforts at streamlining, but we've really focused this last season with Department of Water Resources in helping parties get ready to file 180-day temporary permits. And we'll talk more about that today, but we're doing what we can to see how we can help parties enter into that process and be successful with that process. With our work in surface water permitting of these types of projects, we have learned what sources of water are most likely to be available for parties. And then what sources of water, what part of that hydrograph are more likely to be contested, where existing right holders have concerns that a new project might not be able to fit in, or it might be causing fisheries issues. And so a lot of the streamlining work has been focusing on finding a quicker pathway for these 180-day permits if they accept certain conditions about really targeting high flows, where we have the most opportunity for excess flows for new diversion. So one thing to point out that you might be thinking about is, when should I apply for a temporary permit for this coming winter? And you might be thinking, oh, I'll apply, when I have more certainty about the water year, or I have more certainty about, your planned action. But we really encourage you to start to think about applying now. It takes time to get these approvals in place. And the pre-filing coordination that you do, the help that you might be able to obtain from Department of Water Resources, from consulting with Fish and Wildlife, with parties in your watershed that might have concerns, that all takes time. And so starting as soon as possible is going to put you in the best shape as possible for diverting next winter. So we're excited to talk with you today and to hear about your projects and to answer your questions. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Get unmuted. Thank you, Amanda. That was great. And I do want to thank Jenny for her leadership and pulling this together and really being that strong advocate for all you and your projects out there. It's been really important to tie the agencies together and assist. And I think this past year has been pretty wild. I think we've been working since last year, as Amanda said, trying to facilitate and help advance the 180-day streamlined water right permit process. And there's been a lot of movement ahead on that. And then the governor's strategy that came out in August really put some wind under our sails, as well as the executive orders. But then with the atmospheric rivers, it seemed like it really put things on overdrive. And I think with the executive orders, we learned a lot from what you brought to the table. Some of you who've been bringing these projects forward and talking about some of the issues. So it's been a real learning process for us on how we can best advance these projects in a way that does balance water rights and environmental protections, but also get these projects online for the future. So I really tip my hat to all of you for being sort of on the leading edge on this. This is, I think there's been a lot of good work out there to minimize flood diversions during this year, as well as promoting recharge. So the executive orders have really helped with that. But I think looking ahead, there's been a lot of questions about crediting and how to account for recharge going on from these flood diversions. So if we take a step back, as Amanda said, the circumstances this year are going to continue for the future. We're going to have these wild swings between droughts, and we're probably going to remain in drought conditions for a while, but having these wet periods to be able to capture. So this is a real great opportunity for those of you who've had experience with the flood diversions and have projects now to lock them in, get an application in, so you can secure those projects, water rights for next year. And so this is real exciting. We're looking forward to a great day today. So we're hoping to learn a lot and give you some guidance too on how to advance this. And hopefully all of you will get your applications in and get ready for December and what nature is going to throw at us next year, which is going to be probably very exciting and wild. So again, thank you all. Thank Jenny, and look forward to a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Paul, for starting the conversation. And just a reminder that this season have provided a lot of lesson learned that we can build from as we're thinking ahead. So looking forward to the presentation, but also hearing from you based on your experience and what we're thinking ahead. So we're gonna get started with our presentation, starting with the board's water rights overview. And for that, we have two presenters. We have Mike Conway, who's hydrogeologist, who joined the Recharge and Major Projects Permitting Unit in the Division of Water Rights of State Water Resource Control Board in 2021. He brings experience with groundwater basin budgeting, hydrology, and the application of CICWA. Mike is the Sacramento area native and is passionate about the Lower American River. We also have Shelby Witherby, who's an engineer who joined the Recharge and Major Projects Permitting Unit in the Division of Water Rights in 2020. and she brings experience in water and sanitation in international development and modeling. So thank you both for joining, and I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Ari. Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Mike Conway. I work with the State Water Board, Division of Water Rights, and I lead the Recharge and Major Projects Permitting Unit. And hopefully we have some helpful information to share with you today. Over the last few years, the board has taken steps to make groundwater recharge permitting easier. We've introduced permitting fee reductions, created a new permitting unit, and prioritized staffing, and created this streamlined pathway, which we're going to talk about today. We're also going to share this new effort. There's a collaboration between us and the Department of Water Resources that started last year, kind of late summer. And the aim of this effort is to facilitate recharge projects and contribute to the SIGMA efforts. So in this new effort, the Department of Water Resources can act as an agent to help you, you being public agencies, and that's why we're here today. So in its role, the department can provide technical assistance when preparing and submitting applications, and sometimes financial assistance. And this helps remove a lot of the impediments we typically see with people trying to get started. You now have someone available for you that knows the ins and outs of this process and knows how to help get you started. So I think getting started is always the most difficult part. To further simplify this process of obtaining a permit, as Amanda mentioned, we've learned things about what diversion seasons would work best, would be less likely to be contested, what water would be available in the hydrograph, and what other permitting options would make most sense. So we've assembled sort of a prescriptive pathway that we're introducing to you today. And the purpose of this, again, is to get a permit in hand as quickly as we can. So anyway, I think that's about it. Shelby Witherby is with us. Shelby is also in the Recharge and Major Projects Permitting Unit. She is a staff engineer and has been with the division since 2020, and she specializes in water availability analyses. And Shelby, take it away.
Great, thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to provide an overview of water rights permitting. And specifically, I want to share a process that we've developed alongside DWR to allow for the expedited processing of 180-day temporary permits for groundwater recharge, as Mike and Amanda have introduced. Today's topics include an overview of water rights permitting options, the applicability of the California Environmental Quality Act, an overview of the constraints associated with expedited processing of 180-day temporary permits, including water availability methods, along with an example timeline and permit terms to be expected for a 180-day temporary permit. Here we see an overview of the 4 permitting options. There are 2 temporary options and 2 standard options. Temporary permits, either 180-day or 5-year, can be used for short-term projects. If they are used for a project intended to be permanent, the code requires the party to diligently pursue filing and processing of a standard application to cover the project. A 180-day temporary permit is a good option for a pilot project with an urgent need, whereas a 5-year temporary permit is a good bridge for pursuing a long-term project, as the objections that are received can be applied to the standard permit. And standard permits, either a streamlined or standard, are a permanent authorization. It has a huge benefit over temporary permits in that it secures a permanent priority date over other projects that come after it. The streamlined pathway standard permit was designed for GSAs and local public agencies. It consists of 5 major components, which I will discuss later, which are also all applicable to the streamlined 180-day temporary permit. A non-streamlined standard permit is the most intensive in its requirements. For example, an applicant typically needs to conduct time-intensive site-specific studies to determine in-stream needs. Standard permits typically take multiple years to process. The temporary permit option shared with you today takes some of the streamlined methods designed for standard applicants and adapts them for temporary permits. For the purposes of our collaborative effort with DWR, we are prioritizing agencies seeking to design their project using our streamlined methods. An important consideration for all water right applications is the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which requires state and local government agencies to inform decision makers and the public about potential environmental impacts of proposed projects and reduce those impacts where feasible. For standard permits, CEQA is typically required. This usually takes at least a year and can take significantly longer. More information on this process is available on our website. Executive Order N-722 suspends CEQA for 180-day temporary permits for local and state agencies seeking to capture high runoff events for storage or recharge. In absence of CEQA, the State Water Board continues to have an independent obligation to consider the effect of the proposed project on public trust resources and to protect those resources where feasible. The streamlined methods of processing shared here today help the board make the findings necessary to issue temporary permits quickly. There are several constraints for the expedited processing of 180-day temporary permits. This makes it a blend between a temporary 180-day and the streamlined standard. Diversions must occur in the winter between December 1st and March 31st. A stream segment evaluation must be conducted to identify right holders downstream of the project, and the beneficial use must be for irrigation or municipal purposes. The water availability analysis must rely on either the 90-20 method or a flood trigger, or both, which I will describe later. As discussed earlier, the CEQA suspension is available through the Executive Order N-722. Additionally, expedited 180-day temporary permits rely on last in, first out accounting. This method is a simplification that assumes that all water extracted under the permit is that which is the most recently input, therefore making losses negligible. Expedited 180-day permits also typically are constrained to a standard set of terms. A template of these are available upon request and may be provided during noticing. I will go more in depth on these later as well. Finally, expedited 180-day temporary permits may not take water from fully appropriated stream systems. An interactive FAS GIS web map is now available on our website to provide users with information on these systems, also shown here on the slide deck and provided in the chat. Thank you, Ori. Here we see the 5 major components of a standard streamlined application. You may notice that there is some overlap with the constraints on 180-day temporary permits. Okay, great. Thanks, Ori. The first is eligibility requirements, which entails that the application is submitted by a groundwater sustainability agency or local agency as defined by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that the application proposes to divert to underground storage in a groundwater basin identified in Bulletin 118, and that the applicant has completed any environmental documents required under CEQA. The next component is a streamlined water availability analysis. I'll dig into this on the next slide. A third component is accounting. A simplified accounting method for extractive beneficial uses is last in, first out. Pursuant to this method, water that is diverted to storage under the permit is extracted and used prior to reliance on any other basis of right to extract and use water. This method of accounting may avoid the need to calculate storage losses over time and thereby simplify the methodology. Existing groundwater accounting methods established by a groundwater sustainability plan, court decree, or other type of groundwater management plan may also be relied upon for streamlined processing of standard rights. Other accounting methodologies may also be used for purposes of permitting, but may require additional processing time for development and review. A fourth component is the option of umbrella permitting. This allows for a project to have many points of diversion and a consolidated place of use. Accordingly, the GSA can administer use of the water right amongst many landholders. Filing fees are already reduced for public agencies and those seeking to divert high flows for underground storage and for streamlined temporary permits. However, DWR may also be available for additional financial assistance with filing fees. As mentioned, a major incentive to apply for a streamlined permit is the simplified water availability analysis. The diversion season for streamlined permitting projects using method 1 must fall within December 1st and March 31st. Within that season, the water availability analysis involves using one of two methods. Both are targeting higher flows and therefore less likely to injure other legal users or adversely affect in-stream resources. Method 1 uses two thresholds. Diversion can only occur when flows are above the 90th percentile of that day and must be limited to 20% of the total daily flow. The method also requires quantification of downstream demand and an evaluation of identified minimum bypass flows or in-stream needs. Under the second option, method 2, diversions can occur after March 31st, but diversion is only allowed during the period when the flows pose a threat to human health and safety, based on established written protocols by a flood control agency. For option 1, here we see the permit implementation workflow. There are two checks used to determine how much to divert and when on a daily basis. There may be cases when the downstream flow path can include cumulative demands much higher than the 90th percentile flow calculated at the location of the diversion. For example, when an applicant is proposing to divert from a smaller tributary stream located upstream of a major stream confluence. Water availability may still be demonstrated by either 1, choosing a flow threshold at the POD that is high enough to ensure downstream senior demands are satisfied, or 2, relying on an additional downstream compliance gauge to demonstrate that senior demands are being satisfied. Downstream compliance gauge data could be developed from multiple sources, including existing USGS gauges, a suitable gauge from another third party, or an additional gauge installed by the applicant. The first step is to select a gauge for determining the high flow triggers. Since the USGS reference gauge is rarely at the same location as the point of diversion during implementation, the applicant may install a diversion confirmation gauge at or near the project's point of diversion, unless a gauge already exists there. Ideally, a USGS reference gauge will be located on the same stream, and when you access it, you will see a pre-calculated flow statistics that USGS already calculates for their gauges with over 30 years of data. If there is no USGS gauge, but another entity has a gauge with 30 years of data, that could be an option as well. If the stream has no suitable gauge, in that case, applicants could select a gauge on another similar stream, a process called gauge pairing. If there is no option for a gauge with 30 years of data, 2 stream gauges may be used to add up to 30 years. In that case, the applicant would need to calculate the statistics themselves. Gauge and supply proration are options when the drainage area at the gauge and point of diversion are different. While these analyses are typically done by the applicant, staff are available to discuss techniques and answer questions for proposed projects. As a final piece of information to show how this option works, here we see a graphical representation for determination of available flows during March of 1998. 90th percentile statistics and daily gauge flow were pulled from USGS. During times when gauge flow was above the threshold, indicated by green arrows, diversion would be allowable. Yellow arrows. In order to ascertain appropriate flood triggers, first you need to identify the agency with responsibility for flood management. This may be a city, county, or flood control agency. The applicable flood trigger is the level which poses imminent threats to human health and safety. Examples include historic levee overtopping or failure levels. Generally, we recommend applying for a 180-day temporary permit by August 1st for diversions beginning December 1st. Upon receipt, staff may begin the review process to determine if the application is complete or if further details are needed. If an application has missing information, time is needed to amend it. This is followed by the process of posting the application for public notice for 30 days. Throughout the noticing period, interested parties can submit objections, which must be considered. The objection resolution process is variable based on the feedback and requests received. Finally, the permit is drafted and issued. We'll discuss what conditions can be expected in a typical 180-day temporary permit next. An example timeline is shown here to highlight the importance of early submittal. Current forecasts suggest that an El Nino event is possible this year, which could result in high flows available to be captured under an expedited 180-day temporary permit. The example party assembled the entire application package for review by CDFW on June 1st, less than a month from now. 60 days later, the application is then sent to review by the State Water Board on August 1st, and public noticing begins 2 weeks later. This noticing period ends 1 month later on September 15th, and objection resolution concludes 1 month later on October 15th. Finally, the permit is drafted with objections in mind and ready for issuance by December 1st. A list of generally applicable temporary permit conditions can be provided upon request. These terms can be noticed concurrently with the application. Permit parameters specify the season, rate, and volume of diversion. It also specifies beneficial uses. The places and types of infiltration, location of storage, and places of use are also defined in project parameters. Next, diversion triggers, such as minimum bypass flows, are identified. As previously discussed, the streamlined pathway has Method 1 and 2 diversion terms. For projects in the Delta watershed, there are additional considerations, such as spring outflow requirements and water year type. Monitoring and reporting terms are included to ensure compliance with SB 88 regulation requirements, basin accounting plans, monitoring compliance with diversion triggers, and a final project report which describes the amount diverted and used and compliance with all terms. Species protection terms are included pertaining to the board's public trust authority, as discussed earlier. This entails no-take provisions per the California Endangered Species Act, obtaining other agency permits such as lake and streambed alteration agreements, and other requested terms by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, such as fish screens or considerations for aquatic species. Next, we have recharge infiltration terms. These include requested terms from regional boards, such as notification for dairyland application areas, compliance with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, fertilizer management practices, and on-farm recharge limitations to minimize incidental direct diversion. Other standard terms include the stipulation that temporary permits do not create a vested right, continuing oversight by the board to modify terms and conditions, curtailment of diversions under certain conditions, and renewal stipulations. Finally, other terms resulting from specific objection resolutions are to be expected. Prior to submitting a permit, the applicant must contact CDFW to discuss various points, including the basis of the permit, potential riparian issues or conflicts, specific waivers and agreements such as 1600 or LSAA requirements, and in-stream flow requirements. CDFW typically needs anywhere from 30 to 60 days to conduct an analysis of the potential impacts to fish and wildlife resources. Accordingly, comments and recommended measures to avoid or minimize impacts to resources may be provided. If you are interested in applying for a 180-day temporary permit, we encourage you to visit our groundwater recharge website. We also have a frequently asked questions document, as well as a repository of temporary permits issued for reference. Staff contacts are also provided here who can assist with questions along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelby. Thanks for going through all the different steps, the process, the timeline, what's included in the permit. Want to make sure that we have time now to answer any questions that participants might have. So really want to encourage you to use the hand raise and just join the conversation and ask questions in person. Or if you want, you can include comments and questions in the chat. So we'll give people just a little bit of time to gather their thoughts and ask questions. And maybe while we're waiting, Shelby, one of the questions that came in through the registration, if you can talk a little bit, is has to do with the gauges and monitoring requirements. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. This is Mike Conway. One question I saw that came in was about the need for gauges to be rated. And that was, and I think I took that question to mean, is it okay to use a gauge that just has stage information? And if that was the question, I would say no, because with only the stage information, you don't have the discharge information. And so for this method, we're particularly interested in getting discharge data, and that's the basis for this 90-20 method, that we need to understand the discharges. And if that gauge has enough of a record, that we can produce those daily 90th percentile statistics. So with only the stage information, that's going to be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. Nicholas in the chat is asking, do you foresee a CEQA exemption after the executive order expires?
We've had some discussions about this internally, and of course, we can't know for sure. We expect it to be available for us for the foreseeable future. We have no indications that it's going away. So for now, we're continuing forward. It seems like a reasonable pathway to keep doing what we're doing, with no indication that the CEQA suspension would be rescinded. In fact, we've seen it kind of reiterated in a couple of the more recent executive orders, which gives us some confidence that it'll continue to be around.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Mike. We'll wait on and see how that all evolve. Sam is asking, does the consultation with Fish and Wildlife vary based on whether the applicant is pursuing a method 1 or method 2 that you discussed earlier? If threats to human health and safety are required for diversions under method 2, would section 1610 apply? And so maybe explain what that all mean, and then if you have any answer to that question.
I think our CFW counterparts may have something to say on that. I don't think, in some respects, it doesn't matter. We consult with CDFW for all of our permits, one way or the other. So it comes in different forms. Typically, we always reach out to CDFW independently. We also encourage the applicants to reach out to CDFW. So there's always a consultation that happens. To the extent that someone is claiming 1610, I suppose that in some ways is outside of the CDFW process. But again, if you're inside of our process, then you're naturally to some degree inside the CDFW process, and we would still consider the consultation necessary.
Thanks, Mike. Charles is asking, aside from the flood exemption, why is the diversion period limited to March or April 1st? In what years like now there will be significant unimpaired runoff through the summer?
It's a good question, especially in a year like this. It's, again, we try to come up with a prescriptive pathway that works everywhere, not just everywhere, but in every year. So through years of development and consultation with interested parties and fisheries agencies, we've decided that this is the safest season for diversion. Typically irrigation picks up, beginning in April. Evapotranspiration picks up as things begin to warm. Again, we're seeing it as a best practice right now. It's not a perfect fit for everyone, and in some places that's hard to manage. We've talked to entities that have a lot of snow, for instance, all the way through March, and we realize that's a tough fit. But as we get into April, fisheries issues become more significant, and water right demands become much more significant too. As I mentioned, irrigation picks up. So all things considered, this is kind of the one size fits all, approach we have right now.
Mhm. Thanks, Mike.
Ari, can I add to Mike's comment? I just want to give, the water board some kudos where kudos are due. We have seen some flexibility and modification to the window based on years like this. Learning in real time and kind of planning, like, what does threat of flood condition look like? The board has made it possible that the threat of flood condition can be used in April, May, and even into June in specific areas. So while the 90-20 has been limited to the diversion to March window, to be protective of, existing water rights for ag users and, in-stream flow needs for aquatic species, that threat of flood condition window, has seen some evolution and modification to accommodate, snow melt and, these later March storms that we saw this year.
Thanks, Jamie.
Very good point. Thank you for that. Yes, of course.
Mhm.
After March, yes, we still leave that window open for opportunities to divert flood flows, those tied to health and safety. Yes, good point.
Thank you. Chad is asking, as you noted, gauge information can be sparse. You mentioned gauge pairing. Can you elaborate on that further? Can you provide a little bit more information?
I think the idea there is we do have some flexibility in building a record if one's not available. So the gauge pairing idea is, perhaps taking a nearby watershed and adapting the data from one watershed to the other to help build up a gauge record. Or we've had instances where we've had, let's say, 20 or 25 years of gauge data, and perhaps there's another nearby gauge we can use to synthesize the rest of that record. So we have options available to us to build that record. So that's something we encourage you to reach out to us about, or DWR. That's something we can work on. Again, just reach out to us. We can talk in more details about that.
Mhm. All right. A question that came up in registration is just thinking about this being state water related. How does this impact federal water?
I saw that question. I'm not quite sure how to respond to it. This is for California water. I'm not sure that. I think that question was also linked to state water project water.
Yes.
And these permits don't relate to a take of that already taken water. Where these permits seek to take water out of natural sources that have not already been diverted. So this effort probably doesn't help with the take of those waters. I don't know what else to say on that one.
Yeah, just want to make sure that we're covering
Sure.
all the things that are on people's mind as
Yes.
we're moving through it, and as you're saying, some may not really relate to this work and this effort, and so it's important to understand the context here and the limitation for what this is.
But there may be follow up on that one, so please just reach out to us. We can talk more on that to try to figure out what the question really is.
Great. Anybody else have any questions? We still have a couple more presentations and then we want to get into project specific questions, but any other questions to our board presenter about the steps, the timeline, what actually is included in the permit? We went over some of that. Anything else that you want to know? All right. Well, with that in mind, why don't we take just a quick 5-minute break and then we'll get started with the next presentation. Just give everybody just a moment and we'll come back to the next presentation. So thank you, Mike. Thanks, Ashley, for your presentation. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back at 9:50, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. And we're gonna move forward into our next presentation. And thanks again, Mike and Shelby, for your presentation. Our next presenter is Sarah Paulson, who is an environmental program manager in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Central Region. Sarah oversees a variety of programs within Fish and Wildlife Central Region, including lake and stream bed alteration and water rights coordination. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Orit. Hello, all. My name is Sarah Paulson, and like Orit said, I'm an environmental program manager with CDFW Central Region. I also have on with me Linda Connolly, who supervises both our lake and stream bed alteration program and our water rights coordinator. And so when we get to the Q&A section, I may call on her to assist me with answering any specific questions you all might have. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about CDFW's role and regulatory authority that relates to these temporary water right permits. CDFW is California's trustee agency over the fish and wildlife resources of the state. And so through that role, we assist the water board with providing comments and recommendations to minimize impacts to those resources. Next slide, there we go. So water code requires consultation with CDFW. And through this process, we recommend that you reach out to our regional staff for a pre-consultation when you have your draft permit application ready for your 180-day temporary permit. For us to really be ready to discuss your project and provide meaningful recommendations, at a minimum, you should know what you intend to do and where, and including where you intend to discharge or store the water you intend to divert. Having a biological resource assessment already prepared can be really beneficial in speeding up this process. It can assist our water rights coordinators in doing their analysis of the impacts that your diversion project may have on fish and wildlife resources. Through this process, CDFW staff can provide recommendations prior to your submittal of your 180-day temporary water right permit that can speed up that process. So here is information on who you can contact within CDFW for your proposed project. These contacts are listed on our water rights coordination webpage. It'll have a link to both this map showing who your regional contacts are and also a contact list that you can print out and have handy if that's helpful. If you're finding it difficult to contact someone specifically or can't seem to find your contact, our statewide coordinator is Lillian McDougall, and that is her email right there on this slide. You can reach out to her and she can assist you with finding the appropriate contact for your consultation. So what comes out of the consultation with CDFW, like Shelby mentioned, we may propose measures to minimize impacts to fish and wildlife, and that could include things like fish screens or potentially measures to minimize impacts to aquatic resources. One of the other recommendations we may provide would include notification under Fish and Game Code 1602. This is also known as lake and stream bed alteration permitting. And in a few slides, we will talk about what that is, what that looks like, and the process. Knowing this through your pre-consultation with us can help speed up the application process, both for your water right permit and for Fish and Game Code permitting if that's necessary. So what is Fish and Game Code 1602? We often hear it referred to as Fish and Game Code 1600. So Fish and Game Code 1600 has been around since about September of 1961. The California legislature found and declared that protection and conservation of our fish and wildlife resources are of utmost public interest. And so this chapter of Fish and Game Code was enacted to provide for the conservation of these resources. Fish and Game Code 1602 states that notification, also an application, is required by any person, business, state, or local government agency or public utility that proposes an activity that will. And for the purposes of this presentation and what we are talking about, the first item is what would apply: to substantially divert or obstruct the natural flow of any river, stream, or lake. It's important to know for processing of your notification that after the notification is submitted with the fee, CDFW has 30 days to evaluate the completeness of your notification. We'll talk a little bit about that more later and what a complete notification requires. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the fees. So this is our fee schedule for a standard agreement. It's a sliding scale based on the cost of your project, and the cost of your project is defined to mean the cost to complete each project for which your notification is required. Project costs include, but are not limited to, the cost of all investigations, surveys, designs, labor, and materials required to complete the project. CDFW must receive both your notification and your fee to begin processing your notification. So we receive our notifications through an online portal called EPIMS, or Environmental Permit Information Management System. This is what that page looks like. If you have any trouble logging in or getting registered, we do have help available. There is the EPIMS help desk, which you can reach virtually. And at the bottom of this page, there's also a phone number that you can call to help get registered. A helpful tip to know is that registration is not automatic. So if you are intending to register and apply over the weekend, you might have trouble doing that. It usually takes 24 to 48 hours for your registration to become complete so that you can actually get into the system and start your application. Next. There's a variety of helpful tips and resources on that first page to help you get through the application process in this system here. And you will also find the LSA contacts for each region on this webpage. And if you have any questions about the notification process or ultimately what you need to include in your application, there will be contacts available on that page as well. So what is in a notification for something like this? What we require in a complete notification is a good amount of detail about your project. What are you doing, where are you doing it, and how are you doing it? We really need to have the details about what you're doing so that we can accurately analyze the impacts of your project, understand whether it's jurisdictional, and what the impacts to fish and wildlife resources may or may not be, and how we might provide minimization measures to reduce those impacts. There is a specific section of the notification that refers to water diversions. And these are the items that it will ask for so that you can be prepared. Take a look at this list. It will ask you if you have a water right. If you're in the process of applying for one, of course, you'd want to state that and what exactly that is. It will ask you for your diversion rate, your purpose of use, the amount to be used, your method of diversion. And this can be a really important one for us to understand is, will you be using an existing diversion point? Will you be constructing a new diversion point? Or are you going to be using a temporary diversion device? It will ask you for water availability analysis, in-stream flow study, or a water quality study. And if you have those available, it does ask you to include those as well. If you have a biological resource assessment already conducted, it will ask that you also attach that. And similar to the consultation process with CDFW, having that available ahead of time can be very beneficial in speeding up our review and analysis. It will also ask you what your impacts to fish and wildlife are and any proposed minimization measures that you might have already available. Next. So once we receive your notification, as I stated before, we have 30 days to determine whether your application is complete. If it is incomplete, we will provide you with a letter or a notice letting you know what portions of your notification are deficient and exactly what information we need to determine whether it is complete in the future. So you will resubmit any incomplete information back into your application online, and then that will begin a new review process with the Lake and Stream Alteration staff. Once we have a complete notification, CDFW will determine if the proposed activity may substantially adversely affect an existing fish and wildlife resource. If that determination is made, then CDFW will provide you with a draft agreement within 60 days after the notification is deemed complete. That agreement will describe the fish and wildlife resources that the department has determined that the activity may substantially adversely affect, and will include measures to protect those resources. If CDFW does not meet this timeline, the project is considered approved through operation of law, and the applicant may proceed with the project as proposed. And that is kind of a brief overview of both our consultation process and the lake and streambed alteration permitting process. If anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, let's see if there are any questions about the process that you just outlined, or any questions. I know, especially as it relates to resource and assistant and providing information on what you just outlined might be helpful. You have some links. I put links to the EPIMS that you've discussed, but I know there were some other links and contacts that you shared with participants, and we'll share the PowerPoint so they will have that after the workshop. Any questions, any comments from anyone? Christina, I see you have a hand raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you're applying for a 180-day permit under option 1, a 90/20, what's the likelihood that a 1602 is going to be required? I mean, yeah, that's my question.
It's highly context specific, of course, so it will depend on the amount of water you're taking, the amount of water in the stream, and then kind of like the overall context within the stream of, what else is going on there. So it's really hard to say, to like have a one size fits all answer to any specific diversion, but it's certainly something that we can talk about early on during your consultation process and provide you with kind of some guidance and recommendations on your specific diversion point.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Christina. Any other questions or clarification that you're looking for while we have Sarah with us? Let's see. I don't see any questions or comments, so why don't we move and hear from Jenny at DWR, and then we'll come back with all our presenters and see if there are any additional questions. So thank you very much, Sarah, for the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Marr with DWR. And Jenny is a supervisor engineer with the Department of Water Resources and has worked on flood mar efforts since 2017, bringing her experience in flood management and multiple benefits or surface storage planning to the nexus with groundwater management. During her free time, Jenny enjoys exploring new places by bike and RV. And I love that you share with us a little bit about what you do outside of Floodmar. So that's great. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ari. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Jenny Marr, and I'm with the Department of Water Resources Floodmar program. We've been actively supporting groundwater sustainability agencies and local public agencies with applying for these temporary water right permits to accelerate recharge efforts and be ready to divert for recharge in the upcoming winter when water is available. DWR support is available through our technical and regulatory assistance program. Before I jump into my slides, I will have one disclaimer. You've already heard from the water rights experts. My experience with water rights actually just began last year. And while I've learned a lot, and primarily through the folks that you've heard from during the workshop today, I'm just a Floodmar devotee. And I really am working to expand and expedite multi-benefit Floodmar projects by assisting local agencies in making this happen. Next slide. So the governor released the California Water Supply Strategy in August of 2022. That strategy directed DWR and the State Water Board to provide regulatory and technical assistance to local agencies to successfully navigate the temporary water rights regulatory process for recharge projects that use high flows. So this effort really started, I think as Amanda and Mike already indicated, this state agency collaboration began in late summer of last year. Next slide. So DWR established a program and brought on consultant support, several of which are on the call today, to help GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, and other local public agencies complete technical analysis for water availability and downstream impacts required by the permits, compile the permits themselves, pay for year one permit fees, support compliance with potential permit terms and conditions, such as the biological assessments and post-diversion season reporting. And we also use this collaboration and technical assistance program to prioritize recharge efforts and decisions in time for the next winter diversion season. Next slide. So DWR has the following preferences for partnering with local agencies under the Technical and Regulatory Assistance Program. These help state agencies expedite our support and review of applications and allow us to support multiple applications. So we're not really digging into just one application that's taking all of our time and resources. These preferences include that the GSA or multiple GSAs or another local public agency is the primary applicant for the permit application, that the GSA or local public agency is willing to do the local coordination, so coordinate amongst potential diverters and landowners for project planning and operations. Projects must be ready to divert during the next winter season. So there needs to be agreements with willing landowners, existing or temporary infrastructure to divert flow. So this is not a program that is looking at projects that require new construction. And the local agency or GSA will be required to support the monitoring and reporting of any recharge events per the term of the issued permit and any other agreements like an LSA that are required. Next slide. The following conditions also allow for more expedited and streamlined processing and issuance. As Shelby kind of already shared, if applicants use the state board's guidance for simplified water availability analysis, specifically that 90-20 method 1 or that threat of flood conditions method 2, we really want to see permit applications that have multiple points of diversion and places of use to support flexibility during permit operations and have that umbrella permit. Limit purpose of use of recharge water to irrigation, domestic, and municipal, and account for recharge water using a last in, first out approach. Next slide. So this graphic is just a visual of the method 1 and method 2 that kind of shows, there's discharge in the river where, no diversions under the permit can take place until that 90/20 threshold is reached or that threat of flood conditions threshold is reached. One of the really, I'll say innovative evolutions of our collaboration with the State Water Board and CDFW has been hybrid permits, where we include terms and conditions for method 1 and method 2 within the same permit. So that really allows for expanding that diversion window. So you've got December through March 31st for 90/20, which is typically that lower threshold, and then extending the diversion season using the threat of flood conditions later into the spring and early summer to capture any late storms or significant flow events or snowmelt events like we're seeing this year. Next slide. So, it says on the bottom of the slide, this is not a grant program. It is technical assistance, and no funding will be provided directly to GSAs and local public agencies. So while I've already described some of the incentives of why you should participate or contact us for technical or regulatory support, there is a cost to GSAs, local public agencies, and landowners. They can expect costs related to development, preparation, operations, monitoring, and reporting on the permanent recharge projects. These costs can include infrastructure, maintenance, and readiness, such as rental and operation costs for temporary pumps, which can be, we're learning, quite significant. Field prep and readiness, such as adding berms or trenches to direct water onto select fields. Coordination with DWR, the State Water Board, and CDFW, such as responding to requests for information. There's a lot of information needed to compile and develop a application. And the state agencies will look at the local agencies to provide all that necessary information. There's also costs related to measuring and monitoring groundwater recharge, water diverted, water used, and including appropriate flow meters. So it's really important for people to recognize that there are some costs associated with participating and taking advantage of our technical and regulatory assistance by way of coordination, monitoring, and operation. Next slide. So based on the technical assistance that DWR has provided so far, we've got some short tips for project scoping that will allow for quicker application development and processing. These include identify all potential points of diversion and rediversion, and describe if they are temporary pumps with a preference for trailer mounted pumps with fish screens, or existing points of diversion with a preference for diversions that are screened and in compliance with the Lake and Stream Bend Alteration Program if needed. There are some permit terms that would allow for adding points of diversion, rediversion, but it's really nice to just have that information up front. What potential points in the points of diversion or rediversion may be used, and just include them early in the project description, because that'll really support the biological assessment and CDFW's review of the permit on potential impacts of the project. We also recommend identifying all potential recharge lands by prioritizing existing disturbed land, such as row crops, permanent crops, irrigated pasture, dedicated recharge basins, and really minimizing or avoiding natural habitats, annual grasslands, and areas that might have water quality concerns, such as dairyland application areas. We also recommend early coordination with the board and CDFW getting that project description at least in draft early, and start talking with CDFW and the board about the project, what you would like to do, your intended outcomes for it, because working with them over the last year or so, it's really been a collaborative process, and they have a lot of great input for any changes that can be made to the project description that'll help expedite the issuance and your ability to operate to the issued permit. We also, of course, recommend using the simplified water availability analysis for quick processing of the application. This year, while we saw significant flood damages and high flows, and they're continuing to see the impacts of such a wet year, we also are learning a lot. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity to use what we observed this year to maximize the use of threat of flood conditions by working with local flood agencies, gathering information from flood risk this year. And that is another thing that DWR can help with, is working with those local flood agencies to gather that type of information and coordinate with them to better identify like that low-hanging fruit of using method 2 to be able to have a water right permit using the threat of flood conditions. And also, as Sarah said, conduct that desktop biological assessment for listed species early. That can really help with reducing the time of CDFW review and the coordination on various permit terms if that information is known upfront. Next slide. So this slide is not intended to be reviewed in detail. Just wanted to illustrate that we've kind of got the process laid out over time of what it typically takes on a general for planning and issuing a 180-day permit. And we plan 6 months. So it really is the schedule that Shelby laid out of, plan to apply this summer and as soon as possible. We did see, as part of this collaborative effort and in response to, significant precipitation this year, this timeline condensed. But that's when, projects followed our tips and tricks for, having a very clear project description that minimized impacts, took advantage of that threat of flood condition, 90-20 simplified analysis. And, some projects saw, a couple months, 6 weeks to get from project description to permit issued. So, this timeline can be condensed, but really in your planning, plan for that 6 months to just make sure that you've got the time it takes to get the application together and have that issued permit in hand by December 1st. Next slide. So this is just kind of in written words, that schedule. We've been kind of planning a month to do that project scoping and project description development. In the second month, starting that initial meeting with the State Water Board and CDFW on the project description, getting the biological assessment complete, doing your water availability analysis, a downstream flow path, the LSA notification. Month 3 is really compiling and submitting the application itself the LSA notification if needed. The 4th month is giving state agencies time to review the submitted application and notification. In that 5th month, you're getting that terms and conditions developed, the permit issued, and then every permit has a 30-day noticing. So you've got 30 days of public notice and the requirement to also respond to any objections. So to follow up with any parties that might be objecting or expressing some concern on the issued permit. Next slide. So I like to follow up with some helpful links. Some of these links on this website or on this page, we can provide in chat, and they're live in the presentation materials when those are shared. As always, if you are interested and technical or regulatory assistance, you feel free to reach out to me. Mike and Shelby and Sarah, provided the same. We are very customer service oriented, and if you've got questions, want to work something out, please feel free just to reach out with those questions. We've got the time today, but also follow up via email. We can set up separate meetings outside of this. There's information on a newly released Floodmar hub for the Floodmar network. And there's also websites in there for more information on CDFW water right review, the water board's water right page, some great links for looking at threat of flood conditions and what information might already be out there. And of course, recent executive orders. So these are some really helpful links that I visit a lot in trying to provide technical assistance to GSAs and local agencies. Next slide. This is my last slide, and I wanted to plug another groundwater recharge related meeting today. We have a Lunchmar, which is a monthly webinar at 12:30. You'll hear from me again. We're talking about a floodplain restoration and recharge pilot study that the DWR Floodmar program has been leading for the last couple of years, and looking at maximizing recharge opportunities on restored and expanded floodplains. So I really hope you join us. I know we're scheduled to end this meeting at noon, so half hour to grab your lunch really quickly and log on and join us at the Lunchmar. I think we've got some questions and comments as the next slide, Arit. So I'll turn it back to you. And if there are none, I'm happy to provide some closing remarks.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I think in your presentation, you addressed several of the questions that we received in registration, addressing the cost for that need to be considered, the tips and tricks that you shared in terms of how to apply, thinking about the timeline. Your presentation covered several of the questions, and I'm looking to see if anybody else has any questions or comments. And Jenny, if you want to put in the chat the registration link for Lunchmar, and also just to let people know that the Floodmar network is open to anyone who's interested in learning more about just kind of thinking about Floodmar recharge, the technical aspects, hearing about examples, and through the hub, you can actually sign up to receive emails about upcoming presentations on the topic. Would love for you to join us in that forum as well. I don't see any questions or comments. Waiting to see. Charles is asking, are you aware if there is a possibility of an extension to the executive order deadline for flood recharge this year? I think that's on everybody's mind.
Yeah, I'm not aware of conversations. Mike and Amanda and others might be part of conversations to extend the executive order, which I believe is June 1st. And, there are anticipated high flows through the summer. We've seen this administration be very responsive to needs as they arise. So I would not be surprised if there's an extension. It seems like there's several months more of high flows and snowmelt expected. So, but I'm not, unfortunately, in part of the conversations about if that's a conversation that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jenny. Let's see. I don't see any additional comments or questions. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Christina is asking, the CDFW presentation address fees of their process. What fees are associated with the 180-day permit process? So cost associated with the permit itself. And maybe I can just open it up to anybody who wants to respond to it, starting with you, Jenny, but anyone else who want to answer.
I saw Mike quickly unmute himself, so he probably
I-
has the numbers.
Yes.
Well, at least as part of our process, there's a Public Resources Code 10,005, I think, fee associated with the water rights application, and we collect that when an application gets submitted. That's for $850, and that's the same for all of the applications that come to us. But there could be other fees associated with the LSA notification. I'm not sure, but it's as part of the water rights process, we have an $850 fee that comes to us and is eventually delivered to CDFW.
Mhm. Great. All right. Anybody else want to add to that? I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else to add to what Mike just covered as far as cost and fees.
No, I don't.
All right. Okay, and thanks, Jenny, for putting the links to Lunchmar. And I don't see any other questions. We will have a little bit more time. We're going to stay on the call after we close the kind of the presentation session. So if people want to stay on and ask questions, we can do that as well. But I think maybe what we'll do, Jenny, is give you a chance to provide just a few closing remarks, and then we'll see who wants to stay on for additional discussion.
Great. Yeah, I don't have anything, profoundly prepared, but as Amanda and others have indicated, we're looking at a potential El Nino next year, and it's really best to be prepared every year, as much as to the extent possible. I think all of us were surprised by this year. When we started talking in August, there was a lot of talk about another year of drought, not having a lot of opportunity for floodmar, and there were reservoirs with a lot of space in it, and not really seeing that this year was going to provide a great opportunity at floodmar, but Mother Nature threw us a curveball, and we had more precipitation and runoff than I think any of us were expecting, even when we were thinking about what does floodmar look like. So we did a lot of learning and adaptation in real time, recognizing the importance of being prepared every season. And you've heard from folks today that are ready and positioned to help. We want to expedite and expand implementation of recharge projects that use high flows. This is a priority of the state. The administration has stated this is a priority of the administration. So really thank everyone for their participation today. We really want to hear about what you're thinking about for next winter, what kind of help you might need, guidance, support, your input helps us, strategize how to best support local agencies this year. So really look forward to the conversation. Thanks for participating today, and hopefully look forward from hearing from you as you navigate this process, and let us know how we can mobilize to help. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for the call to plan and prepare for next year, and just reiterate the state agencies' commitment to work together and support local agencies in their effort. Really appreciate everybody today joining us, and for our presenters for providing really important information. So I'm going to close the meeting with that. I see there is a question here in the chat. So those who want to stay on and ask additional questions or participate in a conversation, we welcome you to stay. And I'll remove your spotlight, Jenny. So Nicholas is asking if an agency is using the 180-day permit to jumpstart a permanent project, and there is a lapse between the 180-day permit and the 5-year or other permit, will the board levy fees under the fee fine regulation for having diversion works in place?
This is Mike. I had a couple thoughts on this one. First of all, we do see the temporary permits as good vehicles for understanding what kind of project you may ultimately need or want. So we do see the temporary permits as good pilot opportunities. They are relatively low risk. They do allow for some opportunity of project refinement. So you think you want to divert from here, you think you want to divert at that rate, and you think you have these uses. We do see applicants that, based on, for instance, the first submittal, get feedback through the objection process, and that shapes the project. So you learn a lot, in going through the temporary permit process, and that will lend itself to some of what you might see in going through a standard process. I think ideally, if I'm perceiving this question correctly, we do see it as kind of a continuum. We do see entities with overlapping permits, for instance, like as was mentioned, standard permit processing takes a long time. So you may need coverage in the interim to cover your diversions. And so we have entities that maintain temporary permit coverage for some period, while their standard is processing. So say that's a little more typical. I think that would be the strategy, rather than initiate diversion and have some lapse, potentially while you're still trying to divert, and processing a standard permit. So there's lots of strategies. It's not always just a this or that. You can have again, a 180-day or a 5-year permit going, while you're processing or while you're getting together your standard application. So those are great conversations. We really like to talk about that stuff in meetings. We do encourage you to reach out and try to talk details with us on that. We can work through those things and provide some options.
Thanks, Mike. And Amanda, thank you for putting the link to the temporary water right permit fees. So that's really helpful. I'm going to stop the recording.